lifestyle is like the biggest factor that controls our health. You know, your whole Instagram feed is filled with different health tips. If you followed every one of them, you'd like be a monster.
Andrew Steele is an Olympic athlete and bronze medalist from the 2008 Beijing Games. As the founder of Stride, a digital-first health and wellness company in the UK, he's on a mission to elevate everyday health from simply normal to truly optimal.
I have done my Stride test and I was like, what? I couldn't believe it.
There's an interesting thing with DNA is, unlike any other health metric, people get really obsessed about, oh, does this like control my future? And I think pop culture is quite responsible for that.
We head into a place where people are going to pick a partner based on their genetic compatibility.
We already unknowingly select the genomic fit. When pheromones that we were attracted to in a potential partner were correlated with having...
You're not just a founder, but you're an elite athlete. But how does that mindset kind of bleed into what you're doing with Stride?
When you retire from your sports career, it's a big, difficult period in your life where you don't know who you are. You don't know how to describe yourself. You lose your identity.
Andrew, let's cut to it. How close are we to unlocking the full power of our DNA?
We're not close to unlocking the full power of just our DNA. We are close to unlocking the full power of our entire internal biology to make our lives better, basically, in the long run. To put it simply, I'm not interested in biohacking, and I'm not interested in like longevity for longevity's sake or living forever. But what people should be interested in is actually living better and living as well as they can for as long as they can and having quality of life. So I think what I care about is giving people the insights around what's actually going on under the hood, what's actually going on internally, so they can use that to live better for their purposes, not because they're interested in some guy who wants to live to be 200 years old, or not because they're interested in like completely refining a really super niche health metric. We're kind of just interested in quality of life for as long as possible.
Interesting that you say about biohacking there, and I'm kind of with you on this as well. I feel like it's just a Silicon Valley buzzword, and longevity again is everywhere. I mean, you mentioned it there, but yeah, do you think it's just a buzzword, a trend, or is some of it rooted in hard genetics, or do you believe that most people should just be looking for, no, let's see what's going on with the genetics and optimize accordingly?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm being a little bit sort of facetious when I say like I'm not interested in this stuff. As always with these things, right? There's people that sort of go, it's what they call it, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? There's people that go sort of too far into something, get too overexcited. There's others that get completely underexcited, and that's also wrong and unnecessary. And somehow you arrive at like a happy medium from all of this stuff. It's a bit like when the hype around ChatGPT first came, sort of late 2023, early 24. Everyone was like, oh my God, it's going to change everything. And then there was a lot of people going, oh, it's not really changed anything. I still use Google for search and I still do this. And now we're starting to emerge into like, oh wow, this is a really useful tool, you know? And it's kind of like, that's exactly what happens with health. And it always happened. It's always happened throughout history, you know, from, if you think back to like, I don't know, the early trend of jogging, you know, when no one went for a run on the street, and it was like, oh, these crazy guys go for runs on the street. And then it took years before it actually became, well, maybe people should run regularly to do some exercise, for not because to become professional athletes, but to become good and healthy and have some activity in their lives. And the same with this. Generally speaking, we see these kind of super passionate biohacker type individuals that will push the boundaries of what's possible, look for really interesting niche insights, but it hopefully does filter down to something which is genuinely useful and impactful for the everyday person. And I think you can look at like wearables as something along those. As you know, I used to be an Olympic athlete, right? I didn't track anywhere near what the average person is easily tracking nowadays with a wearable, so their Whoop or their Oura Ring. And I sometimes did, but it required a lab and a team of scientists and tons of sort of weird environmental changes to make that happen. But biohackers probably went, really far in saying, oh, I'm going to track this and all these crazy metrics. But it has transcended that into a sort of, if you're a consumer and you want to be proactive about your health, it's pretty useful to see how you slept and see that quantified in some way and see how that changes based off what you did during the day or the days before that. And so that's kind of the nice, happy middle ground that's been reached from something which before was not accessible to consumers, only to sort of super passionate biohackers. So no, I'm not against this idea of biohacking in the grand scheme of things, but what I am interested in is distilling that down into actually consumer health changes that everyday people can use to hopefully live better for longer. That's my sort of philosophy on that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I actually took my Whoop off. I thought it was having a negative effect on how I was living my life, to be honest. It was,
Right. Yeah.
it was like, yeah, don't do too much today. You're strained. Well, it was every single day. And that's just I'm a busy person. I'm a mother and trying to run a business with no staff. So you get it. So I was just like, well, this is
You're
just
going to be overstrained, right?
yeah, of course, all the time. It'd be weird if I wasn't. So I got rid of it, and I've just thought sometimes it can be paralysis by analysis if you know a bit too much.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But I should say I have done my stride test, and I found it so interesting. Yeah, and I mean, so interesting because then it really showed me like, yeah, God, I'm just genetically made up that way. I'm not just a miserable bitch. Like, I mean, I put my I put it all into ChatGPT to help me then decipher it and see how I could then optimize my life. And I actually thought, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is why it's important to know what's going on under the hood, as you say. But how much of it is like fate? Like, obviously I can't do anything about my genetics, and how much of it is actually changeable now I know my profile?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, I can't remember launching the Moody Bitch report on the DNA test, but I'll add that to the product roadmap.
Yeah.
But no. So look, I mean, your DNA is one part of everything of your life. So you think about this, that everything about who we are and what we do is sort of made up of this unique interaction between who we are, how we're born, how we're made, and what we do or what we experience in life. And so I've been working in sort of, elite performance as a sports person for most of my life. And then I was into working in consumer health, in diagnostics, in home testing. And a lot of that was around DNA and genomics. And there's an interesting thing with DNA is, unlike any other health metric, people get really obsessed about, does this like control my future, or like what I can or can't be. And I think pop culture is quite responsible for that. So like there was that film Gattaca years ago, if you remember. There's various books, Aldous Huxley, etc., that sort of talk about a dystopian future where genomics is used as a kind of predisposition to what we can or can't be. And there's almost no evidence for anything like that, right? It's literally some of the foundational building blocks of who we are, but it's only one part of the picture. So that's why, I mean, I think you've done our DNA test with Stride. We do a microbiome test, we do bloods, we do biological age and epigenetics, etc. And it's by seeing this whole picture that maybe you can start to figure out what are the biggest wins for you. So we use this kind of data as a way of trying to see the building blocks, plus your reaction from a gut microbiome perspective, plus where you are from your current snapshot from your bloods, plus how that's affecting your epigenetic evolution over time. So there's a kind of power in seeing all of this. And I think if you put too much weight on any one of those on their own, then you may, not see the whole picture. Right? And when I first started with my first business, DNA Fit, a lot of people said, is this going to tell me whether my child can be a professional tennis player or not, or whether they should be a runner instead, or they should play hockey? And you have to say, there's like the tapestry that makes up becoming like an elite sports person is so complex and so interactive with everything around you. Are you able to get to a facility near you? Do you like the coach from that place you go? Are your parents willing to like drive you or pay for the membership fee? And do you just enjoy it? Is there a friend there that you like spending time with? All these factors are almost like more important than just your DNA, right? In that picture. So often people want genetics to be more than it actually is. And if you actually take a step back, think about a measured approach, sometimes you can find some really interesting insights to say, well, actually, that's why I don't seem to be able to drink as much coffee as the next person, because my CYP1A2 gene is like the different version there compared to everybody else. And I'm a bit of a slower metabolizer of caffeine from the function of this gene. And once you know that, every time you make an environmental choice around, am I going to drink coffee now or later or in this amount, you understand there is some building block foundational reason which has an effect on that. And this all sounds like, classic sort of academic, scientific, like caveating of everything. But the truth is, of course, how you're born has a big effect. and it affects the way you interact with food and exercise. Also, it affects behavioral traits and cognitive health, but none of it is really deterministic, apart from if you get into like super clinical sort of heritable disease. But even then, we know lifestyle is like the biggest factor that controls our health, right? So it's like, how can you inform those lifestyle changes with some of your genetic data as opposed to the other way around? That's the way we look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I find it so interesting to see how my brain, my test came back and I thought it would be out of this world. Well, it came back with at least 3 or 4 impairments. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it. Mainly, like, my neurotransmitters were a lot slower, which meant that I experienced anger, anxiety, like low mood, so when I have a bit of a stressful day in work, like, I mean, I was just telling Cordelia over here, yesterday I just unloaded on 2 guys in Zara because I'd had the most stressful day, and then they topped it off, and I was like, right, because they wouldn't take a top back. I was like, right, okay. And that is genetic. I'm telling you, like that's overstimulation that's happened. You know, I'd probably have a coffee that morning and things like that. Also said, interestingly, I don't metabolize alcohol very well. Again, I knew that inherently because I feel dreadful if I ever drink. So now I very rarely drink because the payoff is just so horrendous. And it kind of like vindicated me as well. Because a lot of my friends just think I'm boring, but I'm like, no, honestly, I'm like registered disabled the next day. It's awful. So I think there's so much value in knowing this.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think there's a lot of this stuff, which if we were actually presented with this data, you realize, you go, oh yeah, I've always been a bit like that, or I've always found a hard time with lactose, or, you know, when I exercise, I really feel like I respond better to this type of thing. And the way I always put that to people is like, imagine we all were sort of imprisoned in a single big room. There was a group of 10 of us, and we all ate exactly the same thing every day, lived in the same environment, did exactly the same stuff all day, every day for a period of years. We would all see slightly different outcomes, even though our environment was exactly the same. Of course we would. We know we're all individuals. And so when it comes to controlling, if you could in theory control every single part of your environment, we would still see inter-individual variation in what happens to us in the outcome. So when it comes to that, we think, well, what else is at play? Okay, it's something to do with how we're born. It's our genomics. Now, I can't say that, you know, makes you more likely to get angry at a retail assistant in Zara or otherwise, but we know that it does affect, you know, there are genes, COMT, etc., that affect sort of your neurotransmitters and affect those different pathways. So if you plus a clone of you who was slightly different genetically, but in exactly the same situation, you would probably see a different outcome, right? So that's all we do. And once you know, like, hey, I've got some data to support some of this stuff, sometimes it'd be quite liberating. So you can say, you know what? Yeah, I do avoid lactose because I'm predisposed to not generate lactase in the same way that most other people are. And my example with this is, so I was, you know, a sprinter. If anyone's ever ran a 400 meters, it's a sprint event, but it's a very long sprint. Right?
I was going to bring up this career later on, but let's get into it.
Well, let's jump in. So it's a very interesting example for me, right? So we're both Northerners, and we're of this sort of background where you just sort of like, oh, we'll work really hard, you know, we'll just. And so I used to run the 400 meters, but I had an old school Northern coach, an old school group of Northern athletes that I used to run with. And we'd just run and run and run for quite a long time. And somehow I became a sprinter, even though we didn't really train like sprint athletes. And as my career progressed, I reached, you know, the Olympic Games. I reached sort of the pinnacle of sprint activity. And at one point after the Beijing Olympic Games, I'd finished 4th in the relay, which later became 3rd in the medalist, another story. But I also made the semi-final in the individual event, and I ran really fast there. But at that time, I had done this sort of classic old school Northern training. Think about Rocky IV, where he's in Siberia and just sort of running in the snow and doing sort of non-fancy running, right? And somehow I was an elite level sprinter from that. I trained more like an endurance athlete. But after that, we were trying to think, how do I get faster for London 2012? I had the home Olympic Games waiting for me in 4 years' time, like the biggest possible thing you could ever imagine. There's a home Olympic Games happening in my lifetime, 1. 2, I'm already an Olympic athlete. 3, I'm going to reach my physical sort of peak age for this event at the time that home Olympic Games like falls. So it was like, whoa, this is like the biggest thing I could ever prepare for in my life. And so we looked at this, and I had run 44.94 seconds at the time for 400 meters. So under 45 seconds, quite an important benchmark. And I sat down for my review with our like head coach at British Athletics, my coach, some other people. And they said, well, the thing is, the way you train for 400 meters is quite old fashioned. Most elite level 400 meter runners, those that are as good as you and better than you, train more like true sprinters. They do short distance stuff primarily, and then they add in a little bit of endurance on top. And I used to do the other way around, basically endurance and then a little bit of sprint. I don't want to get into the nuances too detail of how I train for injuries, but this is important. And effectively I said, good idea. Like, I'd like to be faster, and I needed to get half a second quicker over 4 years. So that's literally like a fingerclick's time over 4 years. And in that process, they said, well, you should probably train like everybody else does at the top level. So you do more sprint, less long distance stuff. And I was like, no problem. Meant more time in warm weather climates, in Arizona, in South Africa, in California. And the idea was that that would make me quicker. And over the next 4 years, ultimately, it didn't work. I actually got a little bit slower. I lost my unique ability, which was my sort of last 100 meters of the race. And I didn't really get much quicker at the first 100 meters of my race. And later on in my life, I met this genetic scientist who told me about my genetic makeup. And there's a gene called the ACTN3 gene. With this gene, you can have 3 versions of it, basically like CC, CT, or TT. With every gene, you get these 2 letters which define what you took from one parent, what you took from the other. And the C version of this gene is extraordinarily overrepresented in elite level sprint athletes, i.e. like 99.9% of elite sprint athletes have the C version of this gene. That's because it's very good at building fast twitch sprinters muscle fiber when you give it fast twitch sprinter activity. And I didn't have it. I found this out, at the end of my career, basically. And it kind of like clicked for me. It's like, well, maybe that's one of the, not everything, but that is one of the reasons why the unorthodox approach for me was right for me, and it wasn't right for everybody else. So if I was in a group of 10 sprinters doing the same training, they were building that fast twitch sprinters muscle fiber at a greater rate than me, even with exactly the same training, right? So it's a very long-winded way of saying, like, even when it comes to like being an elite athlete, these small changes, if you don't know how to quantify them, get ignored, and you follow the average advice. And if you think about how that compounds for our health every day, and what we eat, what we do, and how much we, manage our mental health or our sleep or our stress, of course that has an effect on your longevity, on your lifespan, on how you feel in your day-to-day life. And even at that acute level of like, I was already one of the best in the world, without knowing that data, I wasn't able to sort of correctly inform myself as to like what was best for me, even with decades of training experience behind me. So it might seem small, and it might seem like an unnecessary piece of data in some cases, but sometimes just getting that reinforcement to say this is why, or this is potentially why, is very, very powerful.
100%. Yeah. And I don't think I'm not overstating this when I say I think your genetics really can, show you the course of your life. And I know you're saying there's lots of environmental factors, but I honestly feel like it's like the interactions that you have with people. So if your mood or behavior or stress levels are off, that's going to affect the way you are with people. It might affect the way, how quickly you climb up the ladder. That'll have effect on your career, your family, your everything. I really, truly believe that a lot more is rooted in it, personality wise, and kind of your destiny than even your footing on it. I think so anyway. And interestingly, you say that everybody, well, pretty much a lot of people in top level elite sport kind of all had that same fast twitch muscle fiber gene. I mean, if we studied like loads of serial killers, would we see a trend in all their genes maybe?
I don't know.
Has anyone done that?
I haven't looked it up. But no, look, I think, again, I think it's not just your DNA, right? Your gut health. Like, people don't realize that your gut microbiome plays a really fascinating role even in your mental health, in your skin health. Like, and I think we're only just kind of coming to terms on a mass sort of consumer basis as to, how I'm feeling today is not just like completely down to me and just a choice. It can be down to lots of factors and the compounding effect or the snowball effect of that. And if I've been eating badly, sleeping badly, my gut bacteria then aren't sending the right signals in this gut-brain axis. My genomic predispositions to these might be affecting the way I handle this stressful situation. There's so many factors to it. And it's why I'm quite pleased to see, like, on an everyday person basis, they're no longer just waiting to think about their health for like once something goes wrong or they manage to interact with their GP. They're actually just like, it's front and center of their lives. Social media is putting it there too. In some ways that's good, in some ways that's bad, but it at least is pushing towards this kind of proactive approach. So like, I'm in charge of this, I'm going to take control of this. And if that leads you to eating better, moving more, pay more attention to your sleep, etc., then it's going to be very positive for society.
Definitely. I mean, once I downloaded my report, I then looked at what I could do to try and optimize, to try and offset some of these impairments. And it was like, you need to manage your stress a bit more, make sure you're taking time to do a bit of yoga, some breath work, some exercise, and maybe I wouldn't be blowing up at people in Zara, but you know what I mean? It's like, I now can take a bit of action. Now I know these things. So it's almost like preventative. But yeah, what's the wildest thing that someone's ever found out through their stride test?
Within stride, that's not that wild. We might be a bit boring. We will say like, hey, your reaction to alcohol might be a bit worse than others, or but there is, you mentioned it before. There's a couple of genes like COMT which have got really fascinating insights around behavioral stuff, right? And like even like performance under pressure. And there are some, there's some really interesting research around this particular gene and a couple of other related locations on your genome, which, look at your, almost like your dopamine response to stressful stimuli, to say, actually, do you find that a positive? And that sort of is helpful in the short term, but it might be less helpful in the long term. Or actually, are you one of those that has a more blunted response based off this, variation that you may have, which might not be that helpful for you in the sort of very short term, but long term that might help you manage stress better. And so there's really interesting things, and I leave it to much more qualified people to give sort of the actual guidance on how to use that. But I find this piece around like behavior and genomics and even gut health like fascinating, and I wonder if we can really quantify that better in the future to help us sort of just feel happier long term.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I went, like I said, this morning I went through everything and to do with my test, and it was like, I can lean it. When I broke it down, it's into ChatGPT. It said you lean into hard situations a bit more. You're definitely risk averse. Yes, you can get like stressed, and you get stressed a bit longer. You get overstimulated quite quickly, but you can cope with it. Things like that. And I'm sure, looking at my life, I am quite risky. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't have that gene.
Yeah. Well, there's some interesting papers that sort of associate risk, appetite, and therefore entrepreneurship with those same genetic variants. I won't make any assumptions to say they can predispose whether somebody is going to be a founder or an entrepreneur or otherwise, but you can see how those character traits sort of become common among certain types of individuals, right? Like if you took a bunch of founders and analyzed their personality traits, you would expect to see an appetite for risk, and that sounds like where you found yourself as well.
I mean, when people are buying these stride tests, I don't know if you do this or not, but do you give them a bit of a quiz on what do you do for a living, so that maybe in the back end of the data you can start seeing these trends of what jobs they do?
We don't ask what they do for a living. No, we do ask obviously more sort of relevant health things, but crucially also what they're trying to achieve, right? What their goal is, just so we can better do that. But what we'll probably start to learn over time is because we offer the sort of practitioner consults, so as you speak to a dietitian or a physiologist regularly, for free as part of the service, and we'll start to get a picture of like who our people are. Who customers are, not only what they're trying to achieve, but also like how they show up in life every day. And it'd be fascinating to draw some correlations there. I have to say, I've not planned any hypothesis around the sort of anthropological analysis.
All I'm thinking is, let's say I'm the CEO and I've got 100 staff, and I say to them, guys, you're gonna love me. I've got you all a stride test. And I'm, the company's paying for it. But essentially what I'm looking for is because I'm sure people would be well suited to roles. And I can see that we're going to go into, I don't know, a world of where that will be a prerequisite before somebody gets a job. You know what I mean? There might be 5 candidates for a job, and then whoever's hiring says, okay, you all need to do a genetic test, and we're going to essentially pick you on which genetic test comes out better in these. Maybe you don't get stressed in difficult situations, but candidate 3 does.
No, I honestly don't think we'll ever get there.
Do you not think?
I hope we don't.
I think you're naive. I think that's where we're headed. It might be unethical, but so's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's definitely unethical for sure. Secondly, I also just don't think there would actually be enough evidence to support that. What there may be evidence is to say, well, like even in my case, right? If I had known that thing about the sprint gene we discussed when I was too young, would it have put me off trying? And in the end, I won an Olympic medal in a sprint event, right? So the way you communicate this needs to be very nuanced and very conservative, because it's a bit like if you're taking your kid to a new school and they say like, well, you're not very good at maths, so let's focus on this other one. And then that sort of has a negative reinforcement too, right? It goes, oh no, I'm not good at maths because that teacher told me. But they might be really good at maths. They just need you to approach it in a different way. The way I look at this, genomics is one part of the picture. Your DNA is a single part of the picture. It means nothing if you can't make the right environment changes. And therefore, it might affect your route to a certain goal, but it absolutely should not affect what you think that goal should be. That's my take on it.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would never have tried being a big sprinter, and I won a medal in the Olympics.
Yeah,
right?
no, exactly. So, Well, okay, so that's like the corporate world.
It's a positive message. It's a positive message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about modern love and genetics. Are we heading to a place where people are going to pick a partner based on their genetic compatibility? Like swipe right if you are not carrying my child's future disease or something like that. Do you think we're heading there? Because you might not be an unscrupulous company, but I'm telling you, there will be unscrupulous companies out there who will provide that service.
Listen, they're already out there.
Well,
okay?
There you
they're
go.
Already out there.
This is not out the realms of weirdness, I'm thinking.
Well, there are some interesting theories, and there's some limited evidence to support it, that we already unknowingly select for genomic fit, right? Because of less like pheromones. And I think even there was a Human Lab podcast recently with some expert talking about how when pheromones that we were attracted to in a potential partner were correlated with having different immune cells than our own. So effectively our offspring would have the best mix of both rather than just doubling down on a certain immunity.
Yeah.
I won't profess to know anything about that, but there are unscrupulous companies out there who are offering insights into like, hey, you might want to select a different embryo if you're going through IVF, stuff, these things. And I just think it's a pretty unevidenced world. I think it's also a pretty dark sort of slippery slope because life is super nuanced and super complicated. And of course it can't come down to just one factor like that. I just don't think I personally don't think it's the way to go as a society, but I also don't think it's actually scientifically correct. That's also the point.
Talk about killing the romance. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it used to be difficult enough, like approaching a woman in a bar. Never mind how you kind of see your genetic profile.
Yeah, like you're either attracted to them or not, and you either get on or you don't. Like, let's not put a genetic test in.
I know.
In the wake of that. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. But then some people make the argument that it's the most loving thing you can do to protect your future generations. You know. So
yeah, I'm not up for that argument, eh?
No, no. Well, I do think about humanity, and I think I mean, I'm totally against things like Tinder because that is just boiling it down to like a profile, and and then this is like a 10 steps beyond that, which is even worse. You know what I mean? You should just. I mean, this whole ick culture as well is interesting. Some girls are just put off if they've got a picture of a fish and stuff like that. Now, can you imagine if they had 2 copies of the same gene and they're like, oh, you got no chance, mate. Oh my God. Yeah. So, okay. We talked about, like longevity and like kind of biohacking. But do you think like all this, like knowing more, is actually making people more anxious? Like I spoke about my Whoop, it made me like have a worse day. It told me I was a loser as soon as I woke up in the morning. You know what I mean? Do you think, is it empowering or is this all overwhelming?
There's a balance, right? So like if you give what's happened so far in this sort of health, wearables, longevity industry is we've tried to go more data. Here's more data. And almost like the product becomes giving you data, like as your experience said. And I think that it's the same as that effect we sort of heard. That might go too far then, because if you're just giving data for the sake of giving people data, you're not really empowering them. You're just making it like, choosing from all those ridiculous choices of one type of food on the supermarket shelf, right? And like, how do you actually know which one's a good one or which one's a bad one? So you get, as you mentioned, this sort of analysis paralysis. And the worst thing you could do if you're trying to sell health solutions to a customer is say, give them so much data that they don't make any changes at all, right? And they stop wearing their Whoop, as you mentioned. So I think we're entering a new era now where it's like, we've got to understand why are we giving people this data, and we as founders or someone building this space has to figure out what are the key insights you can give people. And I often take a lot of learning from being a sportsman, but there was a great coach of mine who used to say, you can look at every single sports person and give them like 1,000 pieces of advice and they won't improve anything. You've got to almost like, what's the biggest cancer? Let's kill that first, if you will. And so you go, just move your foot a bit more this way when you do that step. And once that's rectified, then we'll think about the next thing you need to work on. And so we talk about customers' health, what I'm really interested in building with Stride is like, we've got more data than you would ever be able to get from any other sources. But can we give you that with a purpose to say, hey, here's the 3 things you need to do. And of course, next time we test, we may have rectified some of those. So let's figure out what's the next biggest challenge for you. So in your case, you talked about your Whoop being too much. And then you talked about when you did Stride, you used ChatGPT. So right now, one of the big challenges for me is, as a business, users can almost get a better product experience if they do all of our products, read all the reports, download them, give them to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what you should do next.
Yeah, exactly.
So like we're building this, working on this solution for this where, within the right guardrails and the right medical boundaries and the right evidence, we can at least summarize what we've learned from you and say, let's focus on this. And that's what we've got to do. And if we can just even give you one thing to focus on every 3 months, I think we'll actually make people's health much better than it would have been without us, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is simplify this, give people this complete clarity as to what they should actually do. Because there's never been more noise. Your whole Instagram feed is filled with different health tips. If you followed every one of them, you'd like be a monster or some sort of robot. And then they're all conflicting with each other. That influencer thinks you should do high intensity interval training. That influencer thinks you should just run slowly for as long as possible. That influencer thinks dairy is really bad. That influencer thinks dairy is really good, and so on, right? There's so much noise and it's so complicated. So my mission is almost like, let's look at who you are across your whole picture, your DNA, your microbiome, your bloods, and then let's use that to tell us what you should actually do. And that's the real challenge for me, is like giving people the value because they want a lot of data from us because we've analyzed it and they've paid for it, but giving it in such a simple way that you don't need to think about that data once you've seen it for the first time. And that's not an easy thing to do. There's a big part of what I'm working on all day, every day, actually. So it's you don't want to just, otherwise we'll go backwards. If we don't make this simple and give people clarity, the whole industry of sort of health, proactive health management could actually take a step back. So we've got to fix that as a sort of group, if you will.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. And I've said this countless times, and I've recommended this Stride test countless times. In fact, I was with Liberty Mills the other night. We were doing a talk together. She'd also done your Stride test, and we told the entire room to go and get it, of which there was about 60 people in there. No, you're welcome. You hit the nail on the head there by saying what works for one person doesn't work for the other, and you can't just blindly follow an influencer and their diet tips, because it's completely different. How you metabolize your carbohydrates might be completely different to the next person. And, I've said this a million times since I had my test. Like, what works for you might not necessarily work for someone else. You might be a more like this 5 a.m. club. I am not a morning person. I do my best work in the evening. So for me to get up and, everyone says, oh yeah, you need to get up at 5 a.m. before the kids go and work out. That would have a negative effect on my life. But knowing that, I can now go back and go away. Yeah, I'm doing everything right. But intuitively, all it did is prove to me that a lot of things I already knew instinctively. I knew I felt terrible when I drank alcohol. I knew coffee wasn't really making me feel great. And I felt better when I stopped taking it. So all these things kind of were like, I feel vindicated. And that's why it was so important to know. We've talked about this slightly, but yes, you've also been to the Olympics. You're not just a founder, but you're an elite athlete. But how does that mindset kind of bleed into what you're doing with Stride, how you're building it? It must be a real, to have that kind of dogged mindset that you need as an elite athlete must be a dream for a founder.
Well, firstly, I'm definitely not an elite athlete anymore. When I two kids, new startup, there's very little room for the elite athlete approach.
Do you still go running?
I do, but not enough. No, and I'm trying, actually, part of almost like my founder journey now is to say like this where I need to find a way to get back into a lifestyle. It's a big challenge,
at least.
Right? I do a park run every day. Yeah, it's when you retire from sport, it's a really tricky thing to then reframe exercise, because I can go for a run, but all I do is judge myself and like, wow, what am I doing here? I finished 200th of this park run. I used to finish first, and it's like, I found it really difficult for a very long time. And I suddenly understood why everyday people can't necessarily just easily embed exercise into their daily life, and it was very easy for me to be blasé about that when I was an athlete, because I didn't know any other way of life. Everyone around me was aligned. So, you need to go and do exercise, or you need to eat this way because that's your job. And then suddenly when it's not only your job, you've got to find, how do I prioritize this over something else? And what else has to compromise? And that is not an easy job. So I'm very empathetic nowadays to everybody I used to be non-empathetic to when I was a sport.
I am as well. It's different when you have kids, different level of,
Well, I mean, primarily most of these, health optimizers that take up our feeds with their podcasts, etc., are childless.
The
ice
bath bros are mainly childless. And I remember reading James Smith's first book, and it was always like, if you're in a relationship you don't like it, just get out of it. And I'm like, you've got no idea how tough a relationship can get when you're rearing children together, and you can't just get out of it, and you don't just give up that quickly. And it was so naive, like gym bro talk. And I thought, shut up, mate. And again, a lot of the ice bath bros, Williamson and Hormozy, I'm looking at them too, childless. And they're like, they just don't let, your kids stop your dreams. And I'm like, you can still get up and do your morning routine. I'm like, no, I actually can't. It's, and the other interesting thing is about, it's all about longevity and optimizing, but I feel like they're so rigid in their rituals that it's actually taken away from the quality of life sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, one thing to just empathize the other way around is like, you remember before you have kids, it's impossible to actually think what it's like with kids. It's a world, an unknown world. So if you haven't been lucky enough to have the privilege of having children, which is the most rewarding thing you experience in life once you've done it beforehand, you can't possibly empathize with what it's like to actually have children. So it's an impossible task to say, what you should, if anyone without children giving advice about how to live your life once you have children, and vice versa, actually is impossible, right? So I don't criticize them so much, but it's a very different way of life, and you can't believe before you have children that you might struggle to figure out how to get half an hour to yourself in a whole week. It's like, only once you have kids you realize how much of an achievement that is, even just to go for a quick 5K run. Right. So, when I think back to, like, I used to dedicate 8 hours a day to just relaxing and doing a bit of exercise every now and then. As an athlete, it's like, what a luxury that was. But there's also many elite athletes who have children, and you do find a way to do it, but it's not very easy to prescribe how that will work until you actually live it yourself,
Yeah, no, I definitely was that person in my 20s. Just be like, you just need to eat less, move more, do this, do that. And I had no idea.
Yeah, simple.
No idea what I was talking about, and I don't own it these days. Okay, so going back to Stride, I'm always interested in founder stories and how other people are doing it, and yours is an unbelievable story. I mean, I just kept getting served ads on Insta, on Pinterest, and everything. And I was like, and I actually bought the test, and then you guys reached out to me saying, "Do you want a test?" I was like, "I've just bought it," but yeah, I just kept seeing it everywhere. And the ads were great. Your founder story was great. And I was like, this looks brilliant. And how has it been? You've only been in business like a year or just over a year. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been selling just over a year. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how has the first year been?
Well, it's gone really well. The first year has been way better than I would have expected. Right. So, you know, I've got a bit of history in this space. Right. So the sort of the quick biography, I guess, for anyone listening that hasn't been served one of those ads, is that which is probably not many, but it's basically that I was an Olympic athlete. I retired earlier than I expected from the sport because actually I didn't get as much success as I expected to do so, and that meant that basically I found myself in a corner when I was 27 years old. I missed out on London 2012, and at the time I didn't have an Olympic medal, which is another part we should tangentially
get into that.
Yeah, but and so I found myself having to be entrepreneurial because I had no higher education. I had zero work experience. I'd just run around in a circle my entire life, quite literally. And then I also had, no money. In fact, I had very much minus money. I was in 20 odd grand of credit card debt because I've been pursuing this Olympic dream at all costs, as you would. And so I had to be very, very open to opportunity. And actually entrepreneurship was almost the only route available. I couldn't go into a graduate scheme. I wasn't a graduate. I couldn't get a sort of junior level job anywhere else because I had no work experience at all. So I had to be very, very open to opportunity. And sort of, as always says, like opportunity is a piece of luck, but it's also like when you're open to it, you have to be ready to take opportunities. And one day I was contacted by someone who was looking at commercializing this role of genetics, and it led to me co-founding a company called DNA Fit, which went really well, and so on. And 12 years later, after an IPO and sort of reaching astonishing business success in terms of the valuation of the business, I'm now building Stride. And my mission here is that I have been in this space of sort of selling consumer health tests for a long time, but actually we weren't ambitious enough. We used to sell, here's a DNA test for this, or here's a blood test for this, but we didn't join the dots. We didn't actually do what we should have done to help people make healthier choices and live healthier for a long time. So with Stride, what we're doing is we're building like a service at the intersection of multi-omic lab testing, so DNA, microbiome, bloods, epigenetics, how they all fit together and what they mean in a really nice experience. Secondly, we have tailored supplements which are informed by those lab test results and made to be as highly bioavailable as possible for your makeup, your biology. And then lastly, we have these humans in the loop. So we have registered dietitians and qualified physiologists who speak to our customers to make sense of those results and put them into action. And we're actually just packaging all of this into a single membership, which would be quite disruptive, I think, in the industry in the UK because of its price and the sort of value you get from this product. We do all of our tests every 6 months. You have a quarterly practitioner consultation, and you have the supplement available to you as well. And then all that for sort of 600 or so pounds per year. So it's quite
it's great.
Really good value, if I may say so myself.
No, it is really good value.
Yeah, and so what we're doing is almost like trying to create this layer of preventative health ahead of any sort of need for checking a symptom or checking if there's something sinister going on. So we presume maybe you are healthy, we presume so, or you're within range of sort of optimal health. Let's keep you there, and we can be that sort of partner to help coach you through that. And I want to make tracking your internal biology as much a habit as tracking your steps or your heart rate. So that's where we're going with this. But my story for that it's so informed by this experience, right? As an elite athlete, then as a sort of bootstrapped founder that had this scrappy startup through to exit, and then eventually to this huge company which we took to a NASDAQ IPO. Somehow I think I've spent all those years almost building up to this business, and this sort of fits right at the overlap of everything I've ever done.
I mean, you could have just retired, had a nice life probably after the last one, but did you take any time off in between?
I did. I took about 6 months off, and I found it super unpleasant.
Really?
I really wasn't happy. I was doing bits of advisory work and fractional work for other businesses, cool businesses,
Mm.
but it didn't tick a box for me, and I think that's the sports background too. Like, one of my big passions is helping sports people navigate their transition from their sports career
Mm.
and pushing them to consider a founder career or an entrepreneurship path. And that's because the more and more I've been around startups and investors and great minds in this space, they talk about investing in founders, and the character traits they describe are always the character traits you find in sports people.
Mm.
I'm really, really obsessed with this idea that sports people can make great founders if they just, have the confidence to try. And often when you retire from your sports career, it's a big, difficult period in your life where you don't know who you are. You don't know how to describe yourself. You lose your identity and you become quite depressed, really. Sounds like a very first world problem, but it's a real thing. And being a founder gave me like a purpose and an
Yeah.
identity. And actually I was good at it,
Yeah.
and the things I've learned in sport and the things I hadn't learned in sport, which I thought were my weaknesses, were actually my strengths. And that I was like open to learning, but I was also resilient and I didn't mind failing and I was adaptable. And I just had to get there, had to keep trying till we won. And so like, I just think there's so much overlap between the qualities you look for in elite sports people and the qualities you look for in successful founders. It's a big, big passion of mine.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I'm seeing a lot more sportsmen. I think Bain Ainsley, he's got a business now in the supplement
That's right.
space.
Yeah,
I
I've
keep
seen
seeing
this
that.
supplement around. It's
Yeah.
like a sleep supplement, I think, maybe, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Something like that. And yeah, it's a natural move. I think especially if you're a sportsman with no experience, I don't know, sometimes it can be good to have a nice co-founder who's probably got experience in e-com or whatever they're doing. Like, that would be like a perfect partnership, I think. I wish I had somebody on my shoulder.
I was lucky. My first business co-founder had a business before.
Mm.
But to be honest, every time you do this, the more and more you learn is you're doing everything for the first time ever, even if you've done it before.
Yeah.
Like, it's completely different every time you do it. And you could have you may as well just go from scratch with no help and just figure it out. And it requires confidence, it requires like enormous mental resilience to go, I have no idea what even like reply all means. When you're a sports person, you literally don't know this. You can be a fully grown adult and not know what BCC means or CC, the simplest
I'll tell you
things.
now that I only learned what BCC means about 2 months ago.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that quote from Richard Branson, where at some point, once he was already a billionaire, someone realized he didn't know the difference between like net profit and gross profit.
Yeah.
And it just shows you. And that my big thing in life, if I had to sort of boil this down to a kind of spiritual philosophy of mine, is that everyone has the permission to try. And I think you've got to have the confidence to give yourself that permission to just try. And you can always fail. It's okay. It will be annoying and it will be a setback, and you can mourn that failure. And that's what sport does to you. You can have the best training in the world, and you can be the most talented athlete in the world. You can be Usain Bolt, and then on the day you false start, or you make a mistake and you get unwell, and you can absolutely fail all the time. But it doesn't take away from the fact that was a worthwhile thing to try. So this sort of idea of permission to try like underpins a lot of what I do. And if I join the dots looking backwards at when I first started my first world of work after sport, I was blagging a lot of it. I didn't know why.
Everyone is.
But from the outside, I don't think people realized, like, so yeah, and thankfully you then kind of backfill the knowledge, backfill the experience. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if I look where I am now 4 years on, and I think back to, and I've done a bit of like retrospective looking back, and like the day I started the business and how I was taking social media content in the bath with a cat litter tray and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, had I known where I'd be 4 years, I probably would have been too scared to start, and the difficulties and obstacles that I've come up against along the way. But I just gone into this naively, not knowing what was going to happen or how anything was going to happen. And I've got no idea what I'm doing. Again, I'm still somebody who's got no idea about profit and loss account, but I have great people around me that do.
Yeah. I just think like there's, when you get down the line, let's say you've got 5 years experience, it's very easy to forget just how little you knew, at the start. And so, if someone's asking you for advice as an early stage founder, or someone who's just on their first, entrepreneurship journey, it's very easy to go, well, you should do this and you should know this and you should do this. But the best way to learn is just by like actually just putting one foot in front of the other every single day.
Yeah.
And that sort of power of compounding and consistency is really the only thing that gets you there to success. There was a founder I saw wrote a post recently that I know, a very successful founder of a telehealth business, and he said he'd come to the opinion that like success in business was just being lucky enough to survive long enough that the opportunities come. It's like, so just there's a theory from Paul Graham, who's one of the founders of Y Combinator, the sort of most successful accelerator incubator in Silicon Valley, who says like, you've just got to be default alive every day. You just got to somehow find a default way to be alive as a business and survive. And then these opportunities come, which give you growth, and so there's no master blueprint. There's no master plan. You just got to continue to exist for as long as possible. And then you sort of find a route to growth,
Yeah, absolutely. And just be adaptable. Like, the one thing I've known is we can adapt, we can pivot, we can do this. The business will always continue. That is a given, no matter what gets thrown at us. And I'm sure you're the same, but we improvise, adapt, and overcome constantly. So you mentioned there quickly about your membership. So when's that going to be launching?
Yeah, so we've got our early access waitlist actually just gone live today, and then we're launching that to the public in September. So mid-September 2025, we're going to bring this what we call Stride 1, which is the all-in membership. And basically, I'm very optimistic about this. I'm very excited about it because, we've been selling different tests and then cross-selling people to another type of test, or offering them the supplement as an additional product on top. And actually, it all makes so much sense as to why you should just go, hey, if I'm going to take proactive ownership of my health, one single annual fee, really good value for everything I need to test in one place. And you get the human expertise to guide you through it. You've got the tailored supplement in there, and you've got all the tests tracked longitudinally over time. Because I just, if you think about it, if you've ever been said, hey, or maybe we need to check your iron levels, someone sends you for a blood test for your iron levels. You say, oh, it's out of range. I'm going to change my diet for a bit and take a supplement. The chances are you didn't follow up later on to see if it actually came back into range. So maybe that wasn't, maybe you didn't affect it. Maybe you're still out of range. And so of course it shouldn't be transactional in nature, seeing these things. Of course it should be something that you do ongoing for a very long time, if not forever. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to create this single, simple piece of clarity around how you're made, what's going on in your body and your biology, what you should do about that in one actually affordable membership. My goal is to democratize access to the level of service you could get from an elite longevity clinic or health concierge service, which would cost you tens of thousands of pounds a year.
No, you're absolutely right.
Easy way.
There's one in London that I was looking at, very similar kind of service to that. It's actually a physical clinic. I think it's £30,000 a year.
No, it's mad. It's absolutely mad. The cost of these things is astonishing, and they're brilliant services. But why should this be a privilege of somebody who's got a whole mortgage available just to pay for their longevity solutions every year, right? So it's this sort of idea of saying we can give people access to this, and you could do this yourself. If you're really a crazy biohacker enthusiast, you could find a solution. I'm going to go to that company for a DNA test, that company for this blood test. I'm going to go to that company for a microbiome test. I'm going to get the results. I'm going to download them all, consolidate them. I'm going to look at the back of my supplement and see if it matches what that says I'm most at need of. I'm going to find a practitioner that will pay attention to these results and speak to them regularly. Even if you can do that for a reasonable cost, that's an enormous cost on your time and your effort. So what we're trying to do is just draw a simple piece of clarity line to say, you can get all this in one place. We'll make sense of it for you, and you can keep with us and track that over time, and we can do it for a great cost. And I just feel very, very optimistic that this is really impactful for so many people, and shouldn't just be available to those of us who've got tens of thousands of pounds to spend on it every single year and need to live near that clinic, be geographically tied to going back into that place again and again to get the health outcomes we need. So that's my sort of underlying mission behind this membership.
No, it sounds brilliant. And what tests do you get? You get the because surely you'd only need to do the genomics one once. The rest would be the gut microbiome, bloods maybe. Do you do hormonal profiling?
Yeah. So basically, we got 3 sample types, right? There's a saliva sample, a blood sample, and a fecal sample. So from the saliva sample, we do on the first test, we do your DNA. Your DNA doesn't change. You've got that then underpinning the rest of the results. We're also able to get from that what we call epigenetics. So that's the actual progress of what we call methylation on your genes, and it can be a measure of how your lifestyle in different traits is affecting your aging, your biological age, and affecting your DNA. Then we have the blood draw, which is a venous draw done by a phlebotomist, which gives you these sort of 75 plus biomarkers, so quite advanced blood work. And then we have the stool test, which gives us the gut health, and we'll track that over time. So every 6 months, you'll redo all the tests apart from that static DNA component. And I should mention, we're not live with it yet, but we've got an oral health test coming as well, which people forget about. Like, oral health is a really impactful proxy for systemic inflammatory health, has a role on cognitive health, on the rest of your body as a system. And so we're actually going to integrate that into the core membership too.
And is that for your oral microbiome?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then what can we do to boost your oral microbiome? Is it just a case of eating more varied food?
Yeah, there's I mean, like with everything, right? There's lifestyle change, but some of it also includes actual oral health hygiene, right? And that people don't realize is that, I think there's some correlation between flossing and reduction of Alzheimer's. Do
you know what? I did a pod on this 2 weeks ago. And she explained it all with a dentist, and she was like, your oral microbiome is literally a window to everyththing else. It can affect everything. She was like,
it's so overlooked. Like, people think about, I go to a dentist for this, but it's nothing to do with my overall body health, which of course it is, So we're going to integrate that too, and over time we'll integrate more tests as and when they get approved by our scientific board, as and when the evidence becomes good for their impact. So this is the beauty of it, is that the idea of a membership is, it's not like buy this product now and then we have to convince you to buy another product later on if we can tell you it's good enough. So you're in a membership, and that membership's going to grow with you as your health changes and as your life changes, and go to one place for that. Don't make it overly complicated for you. So we'll add in more as the evidence becomes available, or as the lab testing becomes available, to add that in.
And last question, because I believe this is more important than anything. This I would want available for the kids. Is it only over 18s at the moment?
Yeah, only over 18s.
Okay.
There's no sort of a technical, like, biological reason why we wouldn't, but naturally there's like a care barrier which is higher. And if you think about, I use that example of the genomic data with me, an Olympic sprinter, and if someone isn't well equipped to sort of understand that as a younger person, or their parents have a bias as to what they want it to mean for them, then I'm not really interested in supporting that. So we do it for over 18s only for now. Maybe one day in the future we'll figure out a way to do that in the right way, but I think when we talk about lifestyle changes and health, most of us find ourselves taking the wrong path of that later in life, rather than necessarily in our very early life as a child. So I think it's good to be focusing on a later stage of life for that.
And then this just popped into my head as well. So could you test for, I know lots of ladies who I speak to, and I've had about 4 or 5 now, young women in their 30s, they've had breast cancer. Now, could you test for the genes that correlate with breast cancer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of genomic tests for clinical risk markers, like that Alzheimer's, for example, different heritable diseases or risk of those. It's not what we do right now. We're focused on this kind of, wellness, preventative health side of things. Maybe in the future we'll launch a sort of clinical program for that. I have built tests that do similar insights previously in other businesses, but it's not quite where we're going with Stride in the immediate term. But yes, there are of course great tests for those sort of things. Some of them can be useful, some of them can be not so useful and a bit more worrying than they need to be. So there's a balance to be had there, but I also think then you need to build the right sort of clinical management environment, because you don't just want to give someone a piece of bad news and then be like, right, see you later,
not be able to support them.
Yeah, it's so important. This is some of the challenge towards these sort of clinical risk markers, to say, well, hey, you've got a 40 times increased risk of Alzheimer's. P.S. There's nothing you can do about that. See you later.
Well, do you remember that show with Chris Hemsworth? And he did, didn't he? Yeah. But he was doing everything he could do.
Yeah, and that's it. So, and I personally would love to learn that.
I personally would love to know that.
but it's a different mindset, and it's not one we're sort of focused on for Stride in the immediate term. But I do know all of this stuff, and luckily I have one copy of that ApoE4 gene which can raise my risk of Alzheimer's, but it's not the one which is the highest raised risk. And I think it's quite useful to know, but some people aren't ready for that, you know. So there's a layer of what we call genetic counselling that you might want to go through before informing yourself on these clinical risk tests. They're not always bad news, but they can be construed as such if you don't understand, you know, what it does mean, what it doesn't mean, the ups and downs of it.
1,000,000%. If I am you as a founder of this business, I'm not touching it, because Jesus Christ, the amount of you've opened a can of worms. This is what you've told me. You've done that. I could just see the reviews. I can see the headache. I can see the amount of sheer volume of emails that would just lead to that maybe somebody's misinterpreted something, and it's just so much like admin and resources. When if I'm a founder of a business like you that's doing what you're doing, there must be so many regulations and red tape around it already. I just wouldn't want to add that into the mix either. So I would, I'd be like, you know what, we don't do it, but there's a partner company that does do it. Go and speak to them.
That's right. Well, look, I mean, I'm not worried. I mean, I'm not scared of the hard work of doing it right. But like, it's more just that there are other companies that do it. And I think if you're going to do it, you need to do it really well. And what you don't want to just half-heartedly do it. So we may well become that in the future. But if you do it, you want the correct clinical governance and the pathways, and you want to be able to actually hold people's hand through to the outcome. The reason I've done Stride this time in this way is that I could see there's a white space to actually hold people's hand through living better and tracking this stuff and getting them to a better outcome. I do fundamentally believe if we can give people the right data in the right way with the right lifestyle changes over time and be their partner through that, they will have less incidence of lifestyle disease. So they'll have less incidence of type 2 diabetes, of cardiovascular disease, etc., etc. And I'm really excited about making an impact on that, because that affects our societal health, our national health service, everything so much. You know, 3 out of 4 deaths worldwide are from chronic disease, which is an astonishing negative figure, but it's also positive because that means 3 out of 4 deaths worldwide are potentially preventable if we can make the right behavior change as a society en masse. And that's kind of the problem I'm trying to ultimately solve for. If I'm talking in Silicon Valley moonshot terms, that would be amazing to have some impact on. So it's just, you know, that's the mission we've chosen for Stride right now. Maybe we, as always, as founders, you just change and adapt and you pivot over time. So if you ask, we do this podcast again in 2 years, I might be like, yep, we're all in on these clinical risk markers. But for now, that's the mission we're going after.
No, it's brilliant. I think it's a great mission. And I mean, you spoke about deaths there, but I mean, the National Health Service is under so much strain anyway from just supporting these completely avoidable lifestyle issues that people have. So if anybody can make, you know, better sense of their health through things like this, then it's a win-win for everybody, definitely. Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. We've come to the end of the pod, but I found that enlightening, brilliant, scary in some ways. But yeah, I think what you're doing is great stuff with Stride. It's a really exciting, you know, British success story. I know it will be. But yeah, brilliant what you're doing. And I love the membership. I'm definitely going to be a member. I'm sure my partner will be too. And I'm excited. I jumped on the waiting list just before when I was downloading my results. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's brilliant. I think what you're doing is great. And I appreciate you talking to me today.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.